My name is Pastor Ben McBride. I'm one of the co-chairs of our board, along with Chief Edward Madrano from Gardena, I believe. And so we're happy to be serving today in our capacity to help facilitate this meeting and move us along the process. We also want to offer some sincere thanks both to Mayor Michael Tubbs for Stockton's generous offering of this space for us to meet today, along with Chief Eric Jones of Stockton Police Department in helping us pull this room together to have our meeting here in Stockton. It's good for us to be back here in the Central Valley. As we know, we've been moving around the state, both in Southern California, in the Bay Area, and so it's good to be back in the Central Valley as we were here in Fresno earlier this year. So we're going to start our meeting off. We do have a full agenda. We've got a couple pockets in store for us today for public comment, one both in the morning and another following our break in the afternoon. So encouraging folks, as you're listening to the conversation of what's happening both with board members, to please be writing down your comments, and at the appropriate time, we ask people to line up once we make that announcement at the microphone. As you are beginning to write your comments, as you're thinking around what is discussed today, we're already wanting to generously and graciously remind folks that we're trying to stay under 3 minutes with our comments. And so if you can help us in doing that, we want to ensure that we can get as many voices from our community and from the public to be responding. That helps the board be informed around our decisions as we move forward in this process. Turn it over to Co-Chair Madrano.
Good morning, everyone. The first order of business is going to be the approval of the September 27th board meeting minutes. Is there a motion? We have a motion. Is there a second? Nobody wants to second it? Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor? That motion carries. Next will be the overview of the report progress by the board co-chairs. I'll let Reverend McBride start off.
So we're going to share both myself and Co-Chair Madrano will share a little bit about the process that we've been seeing around this evaluation report coming through, but we also want to be inviting our fellow board members to chime in, so we'll keep our remarks brief. There has been a lot of work that's been happening over the course of the last several months, especially the last couple months since we last met in the city of Oakland, to really ensure that we put forward this evaluation report that AB 953 requires, that must be due at the end of the year. You have the report, all the board members, in your binders. If you look through, and it's under the tab Initial Draft, which is just only the first draft. And for the public, I believe there was also drafts made available at the table for people to review. This initial draft is really trying to speak to the process of what we've been doing and the decisions that we have been making. There are a couple pieces that have been lifted up in our meetings and our subcommittee meetings that are not included in the draft right now, although they will be by the time we complete. Those are certainly around the history component and the narrative around how we got to this moment. One of the key points of conversation along our subcommittee meetings as well as our board meetings have been to ensure that we don't just talk about the implementation of AB 953 as a law, but that we actually spend time in the report ensuring that we tell the story around why AB 953 was necessary, why the public saw fit to put pressure on their elected officials and raise these issues to ensure that this law was passed. And so that history is not there, but it is being worked on with board members along with DOJ staff to bring that into the part and process of the report. Also, the introduction and the conclusion is also still not there, but that also will be included in the final component of what we add. And lastly, there is also the addition of a video that is going to be created. One of the things that have been put forward by the community as we've been listening over the last several months was to think about how could we find ways with the testimonies that have been provided, the activity that's been happening on the board member, to capture some of that via a video and find ways to make a link available for the public to view along with the actual written report And so that video is also in process. We're also going to be inviting our board members today, before you leave, to come over and make a statement about your participation with the RIPA board process. We've got a video station set up in the corner. Just some of the highlights that we're trying to let folks know. The evaluation report is coming along well, but there are still some key components that still need work.
Thank you. You know, this is a difficult for the first report because there is no data. And as a result, the most important part of this is providing the contextual background on why this was so important, what we're going to do, and what are the desired outcomes of the use of this data and the report, and the recommendations that this board will make as we evaluate the data. So we've had a lot of discussion on ensuring there's a lot of contextual information, background information, to be included in this report to fully understand what data collection means, how it's utilized, how we can effectively make changes to the criminal justice system to improve the quality of life and improve community trust. So most of this information will be contextual background information to set up future reports so that people understand how to look at the data, how to evaluate the data, and the limitations of the data as well.
So we want to open it up if there's any other feedback that any other board members want to chime in around your participation. We're going to get to the subcommittees, but we just want to open it up if there's any other updates that board members would want to be presenting or talking about in terms of the process of development that the evaluation report has been on. All right.
I'm not a board member. I do want to first welcome our newest board member, Brian Marble from Porak, who was sworn in this morning. And I also want to thank our retiring board member, Mike Durant, for all of his work on the board over the past year and a half. So welcome, Brian, and thank you, Mike.
Reverend McBride, is this on? So I just wanted to thank the members of the Attorney General's staff for putting together the initial draft. I was looking at it in the last day or so. It's an incredible amount of work, and there is data that we got from the surveys that were sent out to law enforcement agencies that is included in the report and detailed in the report and compartmentalized in the report in ways that lay out for the future how we're going to be able to get the actual data that's required to be collected. And I think that it's commendable, to say the least, that the staff at the AG's office has been able to put this together and make such a presentation, and shows for the future what we will be able to use as a structure and how that data will be available for the public and able to be tracked. I'd also like to thank the law enforcement agencies that responded to the survey that was sent. We got a 93% response rate, I think. No, not that high. Well, we got a good response rate.
Judge.
I just wanted to second that comment and elaborate that the board owes a great deal of gratitude to staff. You've been working very hard. Just wanted you to know how grateful we are. Thank you.
If I could just add to that on behalf of the Department of Justice, thank you very much. This my board dinner has been incredible. And we also want to thank the board members for all the work on the subcommittees. I think this process has been working really, really well, and we really appreciate all the hard work and engagement. Thank you.
Yeah. I too want to echo the voice of sentiment from DOJ and the rest of the board for what they've done, I think, and tremendous effort in bringing this to where it is now, and looking all the way back to its conception. The Attorney General's office working with the Assembly and helping to get this information, get the importance to a point where it could actually be assembled, the effort could be assembled, and pulling us together from the various components of the community, of the Assembly, law enforcement across the state, and I think a tremendous aggregation of good minds that have helped to look at this matter, these matters, and come to some point where we can now begin to use a measurable psychometric approach to gathering information to help us look at the problem a little bit more intently. I think we're onto something good, but as good as this is, it's really going to be now on the point of responsibility of law enforcement, those who actually make the contact to provide the data that we actually say ought to be collected in the ways we've said it should be collected. And I think we'll at the end have something good to respond to an issue we know has captivated the attention not only in California, but across the country.
Before we move on any deeper into the subcommittees, I just want to kind of get a sense of, maybe I'll ask like this, I'm trying to get a sense of how many of us have been able to review the draft. I know it is the #1 priority of everyone's life, especially during Thanksgiving and everything. So, but maybe, does everyone feel on the board that you've adequately been able to thumb through it, or would folks like us to take about 5 to 7 minutes and give people a chance to actually look through some of the report? We just want to kind of get a sense. Would folks like to take a few minutes to thumb through the report, or are people feeling like you're adequately educated around what's in the report for the remainder of the discussion today? I'm seeing a couple nodding heads for taking a few minutes. So why don't we take the next maybe 5 to 7 minutes and let's look through the report. We want to invite the public to do the same as we have this initial draft. I believe there are some drafts available for the public at the table. Yes? I'm not imagining, am I? Okay. All right. Let's take the next 5 minutes and maybe let's read through some of the report, and then we'll come back with some updates from our subcommittee meetings. 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for taking those few minutes just to read through and gather some information from the report. I think we again, even in giving it another look, want to offer some real gratitude to DOJ staff and Shannon and others who've put a lot of work into detailing this report. I think it's going to be an incredibly helpful tool and really necessary, particularly for us to battle against the misinformation that's been kind of put out around AB 953, what it is and what its role is in terms of providing some transparency in our communities. For example, there was just a radio interview a couple weeks ago where a certain person seemed to intimate that law enforcement officers were going to have to stop after every stop and drive back to their station and fill out a hard copy report of all the data and then drive back onto the road, and that it was basically going to eliminate 50% of their police work in order to record the data. We all know that is false, and so having this report is going to be really important for us to be able to have a tool that the community will be educated around the implementation of the law, and certainly law enforcement in participating with that, with this implementation. So now we want to move over to get some updates from our subcommittees, and then also bring the board in for some discussion around that. So our first subcommittee is going to be our evidence-based research and best practices subcommittee, co-chaired by Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt and Oscar Babra. Toss it over to them.
I'm just trying to get the mic in. Thank you. Thanks. I also want to echo the appreciation for the staff for the work that has been done thus far. It's great. And also want to say that I appreciate the public presence and interest in this. It really does make a big difference, so thank you for your time. So I'm co-chairing the Evidence-Based Research and Best Practices Subcommittee with Oscar, and we're tasked with distilling academic findings on the most effective trainings, policies, and practices to reduce profiling, and to also develop recommendations and best practices based on those academic findings. So we met on October 30th to discuss our contributions to the framing for the 2018 report, as well as our specific deliverables for the 2019 report. In terms of the framing, we suggested highlighting the benefits of a database, evidence-based approach to policing, and to highlight how this is not an effort to collect gotcha data, but an effort to better understand the nature of police community interactions and to make sense of the racial disparities that we have seen in stops and searches, both here in California and around the country. We are engaged in this effort because we believe those in law enforcement stand to benefit greatly from more closely tracking, reviewing, and learning from their own activities. Now, the aim of the 2018 report is to lay the groundwork and establish a framework for how to use AB 953 to examine issues of racial and identity profiling. And the idea here is that the data to be collected can be used to inform best practices and to create and evaluate trainings and to develop specific strategies to address racial disparities. And this is all in an effort to build trust, to increase transparency, to improve police-community relations. To that end, during 2018, our subcommittee is going to work on 7 specific deliverables. The first is to create a stop data report repository, and so that's a collection of existing stop data reports from diverse agencies around the state, around the country, but focusing especially on California. We're also going to create a training and solutions repository to give us a sense of what is out there, the trainings that are being used and the solutions that are being tried within the state. The third deliverable is to develop an electronic tutorial for law enforcement on how to prepare stop data reports. The fourth is to develop this kind of electronic tutorial for the public on how to read these reports, and then to develop a third one for the media on how to write about stop data reports, and then the the evidence and data that is gathered within it. We have 2 more deliverables. One is the Researcher Practitioner Guide, and that's a document that will offer sort of guidance or tips on how to build strong partnerships between researchers and practitioners in law enforcement. And then the final deliverable is this implementation showcase. And so here we want to highlight how agencies across the state are putting stop data report findings to use, and how they're attempting to reduce whatever racial disparities might or identity disparities might emerge from this effort. And so the goal is to illustrate that the findings of stop data analyses can be leveraged to make real change. And so that's the focus. I don't know if, Oscar, if you want to add anything?
No, I think we covered it well.
Okay, thanks.
Any comments, questions from board members?
So the next subcommittee report is the Stop Data Subcommittee. Myself, Doug Oden are the co-chairs. Doug's not here, so he left it up to me to give the report.
Chief.
Can we approve those subcommittee meeting minutes before moving on to the next discussion? I just want to make sure we remember to approve all of the minutes.
So can we have one of the board members put forth a motion to approve the minutes as introduced to the meeting?
And the vote should just be those subcommittee members.
And just
please.
votes for
Yes.
the people from the subcommittees. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion so carries.
Okay, once again, moving on to the Stop Data Subcommittee meeting minutes. So this committee took on a little bit of extra because there were some gaps in that occurred with not including some of this information in the other committees. Although, as you'll see, probably as all the committees report out, there is some crossover in all of the committees. One of the first things we talked about, and this is what I'm referring to, is examining the board's participation in this process and highlighting how effectively this board has worked together to come up with solutions to work together towards the regulations, and it is a good example of how collectively we can work together to accomplish things. And one of the comments that I think I made at the last meeting, but certainly still applies today, this is a very diverse group of people on this board working together for a unified goal and vision. And I certainly believe that this could be used as a model to share with our communities what we're doing together as opposed to against each other. So it's a sort of a spin-off on the subcommittee issues, but nonetheless, I think a very important part to be included in the overall report. We also had a discussion about ensuring that because there's no data to describe what is a legislative mandate relative to collection of data, as well as what the regulations include, because they are different. And to have the readers understand what is required by the legislation and also what is now included as part of the regulations, and explaining both so that there's a clear understanding. There was a lot of discussion, and I think Mr. McBride here made a comment about how this data is going to be collected. We are going to be making every single effort to make this as electronic and useful and easy as possible by the use of portals and other electronic methods for reporting data to eliminate the need to have any paper. I am sure there's some agency somewhere along the line that maybe doesn't have internet connection out in the field, but those are probably rare. So the process of how that data is collected and reported was discussed, and the methods that CGIS will be using to aggregate all the data as it's collected throughout the state. There was a discussion and some public comment about including what's going on nationally and locally in terms of data collection and coordination of other data collection sources, both externally outside of the state of California, but both internally because of legislated mandated data collection, says as, let's, for example, SB 71 data, et cetera. So ensure that there's some of that included as part of our evaluation on the data collection that we make. Certainly a lot of discussion about why are we collecting data and ensuring that there's a description of what this data is going to be used for. Data for the purposes of collecting data is fine, but what are the outcomes that we want to see with the collection of data? And obviously much of that includes how we look at policies, how we look at training, how we look at an evaluation of, let's say, academy training, and all of those items. So the data is being collected for this board to make recommendations to change and use, evidence-based practices to improve trust and training for our law enforcement officers. We also thought it was very important to include a sample of what the data collection form looks like. Obviously, it'll be detailed exactly what the officers are going to ask, because if you look at the legislative mandate and as well as the regulations, it's a lot easier to look at that as one document to see these are all the questions that need to be answered. Maybe not necessarily all of them, but these are the things that the officers are required to complete. And then there was a bit of a discussion from public comment about how can local agencies use this data to do more an in-depth analysis on if they choose to do so, and how does that work out? Obviously, that's requirement of additional resources at the hiring of analysts if they're already not employed to look at this data collection from a local standpoint and make their own judgments on what's going on and how they need to change more locally, in addition to maybe the recommendations that this board makes. So in general, those are the high overviews of the Stop Data Subcommittee. And we will need to approve these. There's two of us here, myself and Oscar Bobrow. So you want to make the motion?
Sure. Move to approve the minutes.
Wait, first, is there any discussion on the committee report?
I'm just wondering how support would be offered to agencies as they're trying to do more with the data. Has that, I know it came up in the subcommittee meeting, but I'm just, sort of wondering what progress has been, made on that, or if there are any thoughts about that from the staff. And I also bring it up too because there's some agencies that already collect this kind of data, and so they're going to have to struggle to figure out how to collect the data that's required from AB 953 and sort of marry it with what they're already doing. And for some agencies, that may mean, that they're collecting this data in a different way, or they have all these other, elements, data elements that they are collecting, information on. And so what kind of guidance are you giving around how to merge that, or if there's technical assistance to do that? Because I think what we wouldn't want to do is for agencies that are already collecting data and collecting even more data than what's required by AB 953 to kind of give up on that and to decide instead to, go this other route and to actually, where they're ending up, taking less, ownership for the data collection rather than more ownership, which is what we're supposed to be about.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Kelly Evans from DOJ. I think that's a great question, and I think there are multiple pieces to it. I think that the electronic tutorial that is one of the anticipated or one of the deliverables that you mentioned a minute ago was going to be a valuable resource. I also think that local communities can and should be encouraged to partner with local academic partners as well. We know that resources are limited. But I did want to have our colleagues from CJIS, Jenny Reich, give you an update about some of the very early conversations we are having with law enforcement. It's important to remember the regulations were just finalized within the past couple weeks. So now we know for sure this is the final set of regs. It was premature to do much until we knew for sure what the final regs would look like. We know they're final now, and our CJIS folks have started technical assistance conversations with law enforcement around the data collection piece.
Okay. Dr. Eberhardt, we are working with especially the Wave 1 and 2 agencies that we're going to start reporting the soonest to us. We have done some outreach with all of those agencies to talk about the technical specifications, the data dictionary, and to give them some technical assistance as far as if they're already collecting data, how they can incorporate the new requirements for AB 953. On December 14th, down in Southern California, we are going to be having a meeting with the Wave 1 and 2 agencies together as a group, along with their record management system vendors and any other vendors that are interested, to go over the data dictionary, interface specifications, and answer any questions that the agencies will have. So we will be providing them with assistance.
Mr. Popper, do you have any comments? Okay. Okay, great. So do we have a motion? Oh, sorry. There are 4 members present, I forgot. So there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion, a second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, motion carries.
All right, before we go to public comment, just want to pause to see if there's any more board discussion or comment on any of the things that we've discussed here in this first half of our meeting. We a little bit are ahead of schedule, which is not a bad thing. But we just want to pause to see if there's any questions or comments, any comments or contributions from DOJ before we move to public comment. Okay. Cool.
So just for the board members, there's a couple mock-ups here on what a potential cover would look like. I know that's sort of not that important in the greater scheme of things, but please take a look at these. I numbered them, and if you have a particular preference, please let Shannon know so that she can keep track of them, or if you have suggestions to any of these, please let them know. They'll be here, and I'll set them out for the break for everyone to look at. Sometimes that's important.
And just before, another note on, to add on to what Co-Chair was sharing around the regulations. For folks that might be newer into this process around the implementation of AB 953, the process around regulations was the work of the board to really determine what law enforcement would actually be required under the law to collect. What are the questions that would be asked? What are the boxes that must be checked? What is the actual data that must be collected? And so when you heard the co-chair referencing that Attorney General Becerra just announced the final regulations, I believe that was 2 weeks ago, 2 to 3 weeks ago, we finally have moved to that level. And so it is to, I think, the accomplishment of all of those who served on the board. We all know, those of us that participated in all of those subcommittee meetings over the last year, it's finally led us up to that moment. So I just wanted to make sure, for the purpose of clarity, that all the folks that were here with us today knew what we were talking about. If there's no more questions or comments about anyone on the board.
I have one really quick comment, just in terms of the writing of the report for the 2018. I think when the 5 subcommittees are, discussed, that it would be good to actually have what they're tasked with at the top, before that discussion takes place, so that we have a better sense of what the mission is for each of the 5 subcommittees. So that's it.
Okay, we'd like to now open it up for public comment. There's a microphone in the back, and as previously described, I'd like you to keep it to 3 minutes and under. And you'll have a notice when you're running short. We'll hold up a sign that says you're running short on time. Okay, this is a first. Is there really no one that wants to make a public comment on anything? Thank you.
Well, for sure, I don't want us to not have any public comment, so I'm going to stand and take the mic, and that might prompt others. I'm Pastor Trina Turner, Executive Director for Faith in the Valley, and I want to first of all start by thanking you and welcoming you to our amazing city of Stockton, California. So we're so glad to have you. Just a couple of quick thoughts I had coming into it, and not so much as a result of what you've said. What you've said sounds wonderful. I'm really excited about the 7 points, et cetera, that we're going to try and put in place. Sooner is better, is what I wanted to say. Anything more is better. Sooner meaning whatever we can do to speed the process. Always, when we look at the reports, we're looking at the years and how far out we're going to actually implement this. So the community will stand behind you to see what we can do to move this along quickly, because of course we know, I promise I didn't touch it.
She didn't touch it.
Of course, we know as we wait for things to get implemented, we still have issues that go on in the community. So sooner is better. More, I also want to encourage, as you're doing your due diligence to ensure that this is implemented properly, that we are collecting more and not less. It's always easier to decide something is no longer needed, but it'll take another act of God to have more added once we start this process. So I just wanted to say that in general. And I wanted to continue to shape the importance from the community of our next generation that's coming along. Our communities, as you know, have trauma and they have secondary trauma, and this is still currently going on. Just a quick story. So as we're looking at numbers and what have you, we're framing this. Just a few short weeks ago, you know, we're coming up on Christmas time, and in my own family, and my family knows well the work that we do and the great work we have, we're beginning to move in this city and some of our other counties, not as quickly. But in my family, sister, grandson wants a gun, kid, 6 years old. You know, to play, like most kids did, like many of you may have. And she says, oh, no, absolutely not. But she says, and I hear it coming out of her mouth, you can't have it, the police will kill you. And I'm like, whoa, girl, whoa, too much. What are you saying to this child? What are you saying? And she says, girl, no. She says, absolutely, it happens all the time. And I'm like, no, it doesn't happen all the time. You've got to balance this thing out. And she says, well, she, not coming from my background, the same difference and exposed to this and all of the work that we're doing, she's just responding to what she's seen on the news, trying to protect her little black grandson that she loves dearly, that I love dearly. AB 953, this about protecting data, about ensuring communities, it's about the trust, it's about relationship. We're working hard to ensure that we fix relationship. My sister's not standalone. She's not just, you know, an isolated event. It's what we're dealing with in our communities, and we are trying to work it from both stands. We're trying to educate, we're trying to make sure that we're in good community, good relationship, et cetera. But for the one or two times that anything bad happens, it sets us back into this motion. It sets us back time over and over again to where there is a brokenness in our communities. We want it fixed, and this is a good way to fix it so that as there are things that are broken, that's not happening the way that they should happen, we're able to track it, train it, fix it, or eradicate it. But I just wanted to remind us that time is of the essence. We don't have other generations to either be brought up in fear or, unfortunately, to not be brought up at all. So I'm excited about what you all are doing. We are here as a community to stand with you, but sooner, quicker, more data is what we really need to reverse what years have brought us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else interested in making a public comment? We're surprised, but thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on. We'll do have another opportunity as the discussion develops in the latter part of the meeting to have more public comment.
I'll just speak really quickly to sort of the overall structure of the report in front of each of you. The reason we had the evidence-based subcommittee report out first is because much of their work is going to sort of bookend the report. So there's an actual evidence-based section at the end. But really some of the framing as well is to provide some background about what does it mean to use this data in a meaningful way? What are the benefits of it? Why are we doing this, right? Why engage in this entire process? So that's why they are first. And then after that, the stop data section comes next, and then the next is the citizen complaints, and then so forth. So that's how we're having you report out. But remember that like all of these distinct pieces are coming together in one whole report. So I want us to also have a continual focus on, are we addressing all of the items that you all want to address in this first report? And of course, the elements notably missing are an introduction, including a history, background. I just haven't had time to do them yet. And then the executive summary will come at the end once we've done everything else and we don't have a conclusion yet. But the body, the bulk of the body is there as far as draft content. So definitely look for what else do you want to include, what's not there at the moment that you want there, and is there anything there that you do not want there?
And I just want to add too, if you do not want this particular order or format, that's fine too. It can be moved around. You know, maybe the citizen complaint piece goes first, maybe not. Ahead of the stop data right now, it's not in that way. But whatever you think makes sense, let us know. If there's things that you like, let us know. If there's things you don't like, let us know. I don't give it, I just want to make sure that expectations are realistic though, because here we are on November 27th and we only have a couple more weeks. So if there are things that you want to add, be mindful of what they are. They can be included in the next year's report if need be. And also, this is a long report, so if there's things that we still think we may want to take out that may seem a little repetitious because some of the things do overlap a little bit, we may be doing those changes as well. So nothing is set in stone at this point. I think, Shannon, Kelsey, Randy, Kevin, the subcommittees have done an amazing job in putting this here. It's there. It needs a little trim, I think, still, but we're really close, and the work has been fantastic.
If board members have comments, when would you like to, what's a deadline for turning those comments in? Yesterday?
Well, yes, so the goal, no, they don't have to be yesterday. We really want you to take a good, hard look at what is here. There aren't going to be any additional subcommittee meetings, but we anticipate that everyone will continue to work with the co-chairs of each subcommittee to further refine and edit. Just, send your comments to Shannon or about any individual pieces as well, if you're not one of the co-chairs. But the goal, our next meeting is December 19th, so the goal is to have what is really a near final draft to you the week before. So really, we're looking at like December 13th to get, and now, I know that we had tried to get you, we hope to get this report to you before the 17th of November, this initial draft. It just took longer, but I think ultimately that led to a better product and made it eventually, it was gonna make it easier for you doing this next revision. So, really, if you can turn around comments within a week, this Friday?
Initial comments, yeah.
And yeah, I guess, okay, so initial comments, I would actually, let's give them a week so that till Monday, so you guys have a weekend to look at them as well. And if so, what's that, the 3rd? The 4th. Okay, the 4th.
December 4th would be the deadline for having board members provide additional comments. And just so we're clear also, next year's report will not also include data, is that correct?
That it'll again continue to report on the citizen complaint data, but the first wave of data won't be starting to be collected until July of 2018, and it doesn't get reported until April of 2019, and your report is due on January 1st, 2019. So it will not contain the stop data from California, but there are other things. As you can see, there's a lot in here without there being data. So there's still a lot more to be done and to be included for next year.
Right, and my point with that is that, when we find gaps with information that wasn't included in this report, we do have an opportunity next year because of, the lack of reporting on all of the data. We'll need feedback from the community as well as all the stakeholders that have been engaged so far to say, this was good, but you missed it on this. We need more information on this. How is this going to happen? I think that's really important. I know initially when the regulations were first released, we had a lot of comments back and forth from stakeholder groups. I think that was very helpful for the board to look at and also take into consideration as we move forward with finalizing this year's report, but next, looking at what the structure of next year's report.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we also want to encourage the community to go ahead and take this draft that you have and introduce it into your community spaces. Take some time through this week and thumb through it, make yourself familiar with it, and get some feedback. I think the DLJ has been open to getting the feedback from the community, and we've continued to, I think as a board, really cherish and value the voice from the community as it relates to the implementation of this process. So we just want to put that out, that this isn't just for board members to be having a conversation, but we're asking the community as well to vet this, and there is, I believe, a place on the site where people can make some feedback or add some community voice. Or by the time we close this meeting, we'll figure out how we get some of that information in. But we want to figure out how to elevate.
You could email it to our AB 953
Okay.
mailbox.
All right.
So it's just ab953.ca.gov.
All right. ab953.ca.gov.
And of course, my email
I'm
and
sorry,
phone
that's-
number are everywhere, so.
Everyone email Shannon.
Okay,
so-
sorry, it's ab953@doj.ca.gov.
All right. If there's no other comments at this time, we're going to actually move up our next subcommittee update before we go to break and save a little time. So we're going to toss it over to Board Member Sahar Durali, who I don't see David Robinson here. So I think we just have Board Member that'll lead us through that.
Sorry, let me move on my stuff. I first wanted to thank Shannon and DOJ as well. I know the level of cat herding that happened to make this happen, so I really appreciate that. And also to the members of the public, your comments at our subcommittee meetings as well as at previous AB 953 meetings, board meetings have also been extremely helpful. So we drafted, obviously, the civilian complaint section of the report, and to start out, we discussed the importance of civilian complaints as both a means by which law enforcement agencies can hear from the community about potential issues within their agencies. Beyond stop data, civilian complaints provide an important opportunity to receive anecdotal data about how the community is feeling, about the police presence in their community, and also performance management and training tools. So even if a complaint is not sustained, law enforcement agencies can view complaints that come in as an opportunity to train an officer or implement new procedures. The one thing that obviously AB 953 changed is it requires now in civilian complaint data for different law enforcement agencies to report racial profiling data across, gender, race, and a variety of other identifiers. And our report has data from the 9 largest reporting agencies as well as medium and large agencies. So if folks have the report, I don't want to go through all of the tedious data that was reported out, but on page 18 and 19, and I believe 17 are where the different the data is there for complaints reported. And so one of the things that we noticed, however, is that, so to back up rather, each local law enforcement agency has the discretion to implement its own civilian complaint procedure. And what that means is that there is a great amount of variability in the outreach done, where the complaints are accessible. And so in looking at this data, we found that there are possibly more stories to tell. For example, you'll see some agencies report no complaints at all, and some have 40 complaints, for example. And we couldn't tell from because every law enforcement agency has a different method by which they implement procedures, whether that meant that truly there are no complaints in a community about racial profiling or any other sort of profiling, or whether the complaints in the law enforcement agencies that report the highest number of civilian complaints is because the law enforcement agency is doing a really great job, right, at getting their complaints out there, that civilians feel comfortable to make a complaint. So to that end, Shannon and the DOJ, as well as our subcommittee, developed a survey that we sent out to 425 agencies. 114 responded. And I understand that the state and local racial and identity profiling policy subcommittee also had some questions they put in there regarding racial profiling policies on site. But I'm going to focus for purposes of my report out on the questions that we sent out, including how an agency receives civilian complaints, if they have a complaint form, how they accept complaints for folks with limited English proficiency, translation, how complainants can track status of the report, and whether individual agencies have data available beyond what they reported to the DOJ. So that's just a sampling. That's not all of the questions, but through this data, through these questions, we were able to create a few tables within the report as well about the languages that civilian complaint forms are available in, the components of complaints. There was variability in how complaint forms are structured and the languages they're available in, but we saw that there's also similarity as a lot of law enforcement agencies contract with an organization called Lexipol to develop their policies. But that being said, we only got 114 responses from 425 agencies. So I think it's the goal of the subcommittee to do further research on how civilian complaint forms and policies are structured at different agencies. And, you know, one of the things that was really important to me personally, as well as the subcommittee members, was determining language access of the forms. I mean, just look, I've told this story to the subcommittee, but we had a client come in to California Rural Legal Assistance who wanted assistance filling out a civilian complaint form because it wasn't in Spanish. And I believe, at least, I don't want to give out the wrong data, but we have a significant, very, very significant limited English proficient Spanish-speaking population, and they had no way to access the form without the use of an outside service because this particular client didn't speak English. And so to that end as well, we put out recommendations on civilian complaint forms and policies, and one of our recommendations obviously is accessibility. You know, the more accessible a form is, the more likely you're going to get more complaints and be able to get that anecdotal data from the community about potential issues regarding racial profiling. We recommended that, you know, agencies partner up with community-based organizations to get their policies and forms out there, that agencies also allow complainants to file complaints off-site, as sometimes going into a sheriff's office or a police department's office can be very intimidating, particularly in these days with immigrant communities. So that was one of our recommendations. In drafting this part of the report, there's also a lot of models to look at nationwide, and degrees of accessibility. For example, in Ohio, the minute a civilian objects to a police officer's conduct, the police officer has to give a pamphlet on civilian complaints and how to process one. So we included some of those examples as well. And we also, in this report, listed federal and state language access obligations for different law enforcement agencies. I know cost is an issue that a lot of law enforcement agencies point to regarding interpreters and translation services, but as a condition of receiving federal and state funding, law enforcement agencies must make their policies and procedures, especially around something like this, accessible to the LEP community. And so we listed out the standard by which law enforcement agencies can determine whether they need to translate a form and what interpretation services they need to provide. One thing I will point out, though, is on page 29, I think we had, there's language about, if feasible, we should provide interpreters throughout the complainant process. I would probably argue, based on state and federal language access law, that it's not, it's an obligation, I would say, to provide an interpreter, even if the person who doesn't come from a substantial, okay, sorry. That was weird. This is a substantial language group, just because, you know, even if the form is in the language of that person, if there's no interpreter to later follow up throughout investigation, then that person is not getting meaningful access to the civilian complaint forms. And I'm not going to bore folks on the legal analysis. That's all listed out in the report. Another thing that we recommended is that complaint procedures be in writing, and that even policies on how to investigate complaints. For example, the San Jose Independent Police Auditor has a codified policy on how investigations can be conducted so that there's not a great degree of variability, and that there's standardized processes and uniformity in interviews and stuff like that. And the last thing is future data collection elements. There was a recommendation that the year in which a complaint is reported be further refined in future reports, because as it is now, we don't know whether the 2016 civilian complaint data some of those complaints are from 2015 or earlier. There's not a way to really refine that data. And I see that we have an add-in section for vision for future reports that I think the subcommittee will also be working on. So I said a lot. So, questions, comments? Anything? approve the minutes? Okay, so I'm making a motion to approve the minutes for the sub. Okay, there you go. All in favor? Mhm. Yes. All right.
So there was a motion, was there a second? Who seconded it? Okay, is there-
Yeah, it's only, I think it's just me, right? I. Can I do that?
It's acclamation.
Yeah, there you go.
Motion carries.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for sitting by very quietly. I think this is the quietest RIPA meeting that we've had. I think people are still full of Thanksgiving food. So we're going to go ahead and take our morning break. It's 11:18. Maybe if we can all be back here, let's say at 11:40. Let's be back at 11:40, and we'll get started with the rest of our day. Thank you.